You're listening to Ian Punnett on Coast to Coast AM. This is the Premier Radio Networks.
Many of you know about Jim Marrs already because of his book, Alien Agenda. And I want to be very careful in how I pronounce it so that people don't think I was talking about Alien Gonzalez, by the way, which right now is ranking as a huge talk radio turnoff. But Rule by Secrecy is Jim Marrs' latest book, The Hidden History That Connects the Trilateral Commission, the Freemasons, and the Great Pyramids. It's a book which it would be more accurately described, I believe, an encyclopedia. It lists literally every organization that you have ever heard of that has been alleged to have been involved in either schemes of history or the machinations of modern-day events. And Jim Marrs goes into great detail about which organizations are the ones which have had the greatest impact on human events. In fact, some of the organizations that he talks about in great length have changed their name, changed their style perhaps, changed their marketing or their presentation, their public face, but have just merely gone from the ages morphing and reinventing themselves whenever they found that they had received too much negative publicity in the form which they had previously taken. Included also in the book are breakdowns of some of the most important conflicts, both in world and in American history, militarily and economically, and how rule by secrecy has made a difference in the lives of all of us, with very few of us ever being aware of it. You've heard people for an hour talk about their own experiences with organizations like the P2 Lodge, Skull and Bones, the Globalist Conspiracy, Rosicrucians, fears about economic control, Kabbalistic economic control, not to mention other organizations like the Bilderbergers, which many people have never heard of. But we'll get down to the bottom of all of them. We'll get to the cases of all of the secret societies with Jim Marrs, who will then later on take your calls coming up. My name's Ian Punnett, and this is Coast to Coast AM.
All over the world, this is Coast to Coast AM on the Premier Radio Networks.
Jim Marrs, the author of Rule by Secrecy, joins us now, and Jim, I have to say that over the last couple of weeks that I've been reading your book, I have been unable to put it down, and thank you for answering so many of the questions that I've had floating around in me for years. Of course, dang you for also raising another 1,000 more, but thanks for giving us your time this morning.
That's quite all right, Ian. It's great to be with you.
There are so many aspects of the historical secret societies, in particular, the Knights Templar, the Assassins, the Illuminati, that have captured my imagination, that I do want to get to, as well as the current domestic secret societies in effect as well. But before I do, I want to stop at that one point that you make early on in the book and dispense, if we can, with the anti-Semitism that frequently floats around these discussions from people who have been ill-informed about the true nature of secret societies. Can you address that quickly?
Absolutely, and that's something we need to get out of the way right away, because in the past there have been people who could clearly see the footprints of conspiracy that was going on. And unfortunately, I really had hoped to avoid religion in this whole thing, but if you go back and study, you find that religion and history are all intertwined, so you do get into some of that. The problem has been, although they could see this conspiracy, they always tried to find a scapegoat, and unfortunately the Jews, of course, have always been a favorite scapegoat in Europe and sometimes in the United States. But to say that it's a Jewish world conspiracy would be the same as saying that Hitler and the Nazis was some sort of white conspiracy. It just doesn't hold water. Yes, there are many people of the Jewish faith that may be involved in some of these secret societies, but to single that particular group out is just totally wrong-headed. It's the same thing, of course, that later on, once everybody realized that it was not really a worldwide Jewish conspiracy, then it kind of evolved into, well, it was the worldwide communist conspiracy, and a lot of us remember the days when that was the big boogaboo. And, of course, that's not true either because, interestingly enough, when you go back and really research these societies, you find that many of these people, and in this country and on Wall Street, were the very people who financed and hence created communism. And that throws people into confusion too. But like, for instance, during the Vietnam War, I'm a Vietnam era guy myself. I was in the Army during the Vietnam War, and I was absolutely shocked to find that at the height of the Vietnam War, when our boys and our sons, our husbands were all over there fighting, and we were told that it was necessary to fight the North Vietnamese because they were simply surrogates of the communists in Russia and in China. I find that under Lyndon Johnson and with the approval, in fact, the instigation of some of the Wall Street financiers, our aid to Russia actually increased. And we were giving them millions of dollars, and they were building facilities such as the Kama River Truck Factory, where they produced military vehicles that they then shipped to Vietnam to be used against our own people. It's an amazing situation.
Well, and an appropriate comment to make, too, here on the 25th anniversary, as of this show, of the Vietnam War. But just to get back then, just to wrap that up, and I appreciate you dispensing of this in the book and also on the air, so that we don't have to visit this this sort of dark aspect of human nature that always wants to seem to just limit these secret societies to just being part of some global Jewish conspiracy. That just to address that there's throughout the whole book, throughout the whole history of secret societies, there's always a difference between the public face, which is offered of the group, and the group's actual private beliefs.
That's true, and what you also find is, and this is true within corporations, it's true within militaries, it's true in these secret societies, they have what I refer to as a pyramid of power. In other words, the power and the control and the true agenda is only known to a handful of people at the very top of these organizations. For example, when you go through there, and I'm sure you've already read some of it, that involves the Freemasons.
Read it all.
I'm not about to say that all the Masons in the United States are part of some nefarious plot. It's simply not true. But what you find is, and even Masonic authors and writers themselves make it very plain that within Masonry, there is an inner circle that knows more than the outer circle, which is the bulk of the membership.
In fact, in a way, in the title or in the subtitle of the book, The Hidden History That Connects the Trilateral Commission, the Freemasons, and the Great Pyramids, pyramids here is kind of a pun, because many of these groups are not only built on this pyramidal power structure of which you speak, but also contain the ancient mysteries that date back to early Egypt.
That's absolutely true, and if anybody has any doubts about that, all you have to do is look on the backside of the dollar bill, and you find the pyramid, you find the eye in the pyramid,
right.
You even find the Latin words meaning basically New World Order.
Right. Let's then, and thank you for, let's just clearing the air for that, because I want to tell you that just in the first hour that we got talking, there was obviously a lot of people that still feel very much as though they have in their own life experienced the power of a secret society, and of the 10 callers or so we took on it, we heard 10 different groups mentioned. Before we go back in history a bit, let's talk about where we stand right now. Which one of the secret societies that are in effect still have the most power and flex it in our culture in America?
Well, of course, today, as we all know, money talks, and so it would be whoever controls the money obviously has a tremendous amount of control. Now, these people in control, actually, let me make this clear, Ian, I don't I don't want the people to have the idea that whole organizations, such as the Trilateral Commission or the Council on Foreign Relations, that they in and of themselves dominate everything. It is the leadership. It is the inner circle, the inner elite of these organizations. We start with the Trilateral Commission, which is named after the trilateral regions of Japan, North America, Europe. This organization was founded in 1972 by David Rockefeller and 7 other members of the even more secretive Council on Foreign Relations. So I think what we had here was an attempt to deflect attention away from the secretive Council on Foreign Relations into an easier way. Today, what we have is a lot of these people within these organizations also are very heavily involved in the economic groups that are beginning to take a leading role in the world, such as the G7 and the Federal Reserve System, the European Union, and of course the World Trade Organization, which evolved out of our trade agreements like NAFTA and things like that.
Globalism is the theme that ties all of these groups together. Is that in and of itself wrong?
Well, I'm not real sure, but there is really no question that that's their agenda, because they pretty much lay that out. I will quote to you from Strobe Talbot, President Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State, was quoted in 1992 as saying that, and by the way, Strobe Talbot is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he said in 1992, in the next century, meaning today, nations as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. Now, you know, I would take issue with that, and I think a lot of people would, but that is their stated belief, and that's where they're coming from. Now, is this all terrible and bad? I mean, after all, we all do occupy this one world. We are part of the human race, and in that we're all together. We're all in the same boat. So is a global society, a global government, global money, global army, is that really bad? Is that really good? I don't really know, okay? But here's what bothers me, and this is what led me to write Rule by Secrecy, is that they are pushing this globalist agenda, and not only do we not get to vote on it, a lot of us never really understand what's going on. Now, some of us do. Those people that demonstrated in Seattle, those people that recently demonstrated in Washington, D.C., they understood, but yet the news media, which of course is now dominated by 3 or 4 major corporations, which are controlled and owned to a great extent by these very same people we're talking about, they only give us the surface news. Oh, demonstrators, battle police in Washington, D.C. But they really never give us a clear picture of what are these people demonstrating against. And I can tell you that the bottom line is they are concerned over the loss of our national sovereignty.
And what's interesting to me about that, though, and I just want to pick at that if I can for a second, that I think in many ways, though, that's kind of a coincidence as opposed to an intention. I don't think in many ways those people protesting, especially the younger people, with the colored hair and the baggy pants, and I don't believe that they're all that nationalistic. I don't believe that they are brimming with a kind of American pride that they feel is threatened by globalism. Instead, I think it's just kind of accidental that they end up in this camp. They're there for different reasons, and I would only guess and say that most of them are mad because of environmental issues that they will be unable to control if our laws can be circumvented by World Trade Organization rulings on conservation versus the economy. And so it's sort of weird how, I don't, at least unless you know more than I do on those guys, I see them as being much more anarchists per se than being true patriots in that way.
I think you're right in a great extent there. In fact, it's really kind of fascinating to me that a lot of those people, as it's kind of a loose amalgamation of different groups. You've got environmentalists, you've got unionists. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? That union members and young environmentalists are all getting together.
Anytime you can get Pat Buchanan together with a bunch of guys with purple hair, you've got something that is very special and should be kept.
I think you're right, but nevertheless, though, what I said, I still think holds true, which is they may not truly understand it, but what they really are upset about is the loss of input. You know, we don't get to vote on a lot of these things. A lot of these things take place out of the reach of the average person. For example, in any major city of the United States, you can pass any law you want to, but it can always be superseded at the federal level. And what's really spooky now is that there are now been about 24 U.S. laws which have been kind of set aside because it conflicted with the World Trade Organization.
Right. And that in itself is part of the great discussion that exists in the book Rule by Secrecy, the hidden history that sort of connects everything together. I'm going to be completely selfish with you, Jim, and I'm not going to let anybody else jump in on the phone for the remainder of this hour. However, we will open up the calls next hour for people that want to make their own individual connections with many of these secret societies. But when we come back from this break, I just want to tell you, I want to go back in time. We've been on the front pages of the newspapers in this so far, but I want to take it back into the history pages. And the kinds of organizations that you talk about, all I can say is that if I had lived in those times, that's the group to which I would have wanted to belong, because they sound like the movers and the shakers and the people in the know, the people that contained the ancient mysteries. And we'll get more into those coming up as well with author Jim Marrs with Rule by Secrecy. Coast to Coast AM. My name's Ian Punnett.
All over the world, this is Coast to Coast AM on the Premier Radio Networks. To purchase cassette copies of this program, dial 1-800-917-4278. Ian Punnett on Coast to Coast AM. This is the Premier Radio Networks.
As you've heard me mention in the past, I am about halfway through my Masters of Divinity program. I'm not sure when I'll ever finish. I'm working full-time and going to seminary part-time, but I would be very challenged to continue on in the seminary if I thought there was a chance that I could join the Knights Templar. And that may be more exaggeration than I intend, but it is an absolutely fascinating chapter of European history. The Knights Templar, the organization that, it seems, all secret societies in one way or another hinge upon. There is a crucial time in our history when the Knights Templar come in seemingly out of nowhere, develop enormous wealth, power, and influence overnight at a time when Western society was dominated by the Roman Church. The Knights Templar become a force of their own. How did they do it? The fact that they existed is not debated. The Knights Templar are mentioned in most mainstream history books. But what they achieved and how? What was the ancient mystery that they may have discovered that made the difference between being just another guild of would-be royals and the organization that is the granddaddy of secret societies, and we'll come back to that, for the history of the Knights Templar, what they may have dug up when Jerusalem had been recaptured, and what the earliest crusades might really have been about in the first place, with author Jim Marrs, Rule by Secrecy. Next, my name's Ian Punnett, and this is Coast to Coast AM.
All over the world, this is Coast to Coast AM on the Premier Radio Networks.
It's a fascinating book, Rule by Secrecy, author Jim Marrs, the hidden history that connects the Trilateral Commission, the Freemasons, and the Great Pyramids. My name's Ian Punnett, and Jim Marrs, thanks for giving us all of this time tonight. I can see why in the years of research that you've been doing on this subject, why you are so well educated on all of the various types of organizations. Of all of the ones which you have researched, however, the Knights Templar remain my favorite, and I'll ask you more about them in just a second, but first let me ask you, what's yours? Of all of the secret societies that have ever existed, which one fascinates you the most?
Well, I think I'd have to agree with you, Ian, and the Knights Templar were really something. I'd have to say that they were probably the world's first multinational corporation.
Yeah.
And the things that they brought to us, they've been marginalized largely in history. And yet, if you really go back and look at it, they are the ones who probably brought Western civilization out of the Dark Ages. They brought advanced architecture, medical techniques. Their ships were the first to use magnetic compasses, and there is even the very real possibility that it was the Knights Templar who actually first came to the New World, to the Americas, and in fact may have even been responsible for naming our country, America.
Take that for the very end, because it comes at a crucial time near the end of the history of the Knights Templar anyway.
Right.
But I want to build up to that because it was my favorite part of the book. I read this to my wife like 5 times. I just kept reading it to her going, this is just fascinating. That was my favorite part.
Well, unfortunately, it is. It's very complex, and there's so much that we don't know, so you have to really learn about this stuff as you go away. I'm going to be the first to tell everybody that my book, Rule by Secrecy, is not going to be a real quick and easy read, you know?
Oh, but
you're going to have to go back, and you're going to have to go back again and look at it.
But you write it very well. I mean, for the complexity of the information, you disseminate it beautifully. And I have to say that in as much as I read a lot of books, you're a very good writer.
Well,
and,
thank you so much.
I mean,
I got a kick out of your assistant there, Lisa, who said, you know, this is kind of a secret societies for dummies.
Yeah, it is.
And you know, that's not that far from the truth.
Oh,
in fact, it's really funny. This is the book that I wished I could have gotten hold of years ago, because I've always been fascinated with the Knights Templar and the Assassins and the Cathars and the Merovingians, but I couldn't ever go to one place and get some just straight across the board factual information.
And you include so much mainstream material in this research too, which I appreciate. I mean, the number of times, for example, that so much of the information is just based on something out of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and you'd think that you know, if you were going to research something like this, sometimes you'd be quoting from a source that was quoting from a source and quoting from a source, but you actually find a lot of the smoking guns in this in some pretty available media.
Well, you know, it's funny, and it's kind of like the dictionary. I've always had a problem, you know. How can you go look up the word if you don't know how to spell the word?
Exactly.
And it's the same thing here. You can go look up this stuff, but most people don't even know where to start.
Well, let's just say that again, for people that are unfamiliar with this, is a primer. It is almost an encyclopedia of secret societies, and yet it's presented in a narrative form. So that we get an idea from sort of we sort of start in modern day and then we go back and then we end in modern day again. Let's unpack a little bit about the Knights Templar, though, because as I mentioned, they seem to be the secret society on which so many other groups are based. they literally had no profile and then extreme prominence in a very short period of time. Can you explain quickly from where did they develop and how do you believe they achieved their ultimate power?
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. The Knights Templar were formed in the year 1118, just a little over 100 years after the holy city of Jerusalem had been taken from the Muslims by the Christian Crusaders. There's even evidence that perhaps the Crusades were actually fomented among royalty and wealthy people in Europe for the very purpose of getting into the Holy Land and trying to obtain information about the very origins of Christianity. So in the year 1118, these 9 knights, all of whom were connected to some royal families in Europe, arrived in Jerusalem and asked if they could be headquartered in the what used to be Solomon's Temple. Today it's known as the Dome of the Rock. It's the giant mosque there in the middle of Jerusalem. And their purpose, they said, was to protect Christian people journeying to Jerusalem. But the fact is, they never went out and guarded any roads, okay? What they did was stay right there in what used to be Solomon's Temple, and they excavated and they dug way down into the earth. And they found things, okay? They found documents. They found scrolls. They also found riches. A copper scroll that was discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945 that was an ancient Jewish scroll that was actually on copper, described a great wealth of diamonds and gems and gold and all like that had been hidden under the temple. So obviously they must have found some great wealth, but that wasn't the secret of their power. Their power was the information that they found there under the ancient Temple of Solomon. And what precisely this information was has been the source of great debate, controversy, and mystery over the years. And I'm not even going to try to pretend that I can tell you precisely what it all was. But they obviously obtained a lot of knowledge because they came back to Europe, and very rapidly they rose to incredible wealth and power. They built huge, beautiful cathedrals that we still go and visit today to look at, and there are certain aspects such as the high vaulted ceilings and the flying buttresses, and particularly in some of their stained glass, that even today we're not real certain how they did all of that.
Yeah,
and as I mentioned, they brought in secrets of navigation and medicine,
right,
et cetera, et cetera. So obviously they learned great secrets, and some of their secrets must have been very, very tough to bear by the early Roman Church, because eventually the Church led a crusade against the Knights Templar and effectively exterminated them.
Well, or at least forced them underground. And
that's it. Actually, they didn't exterminate all of them, but they forced them underground, and that's when they went and became the early progenitors of Freemasonry.
Well,
in fact, within Freemasonry, there's an order that's known as the Knights Templar.
I read a couple years ago the Prince and Pinkett book on the Turin Shroud, and they go into details on the Knights Templar as well. That was very fascinating, and I know that you use some of their resources in your book.
That's true. That was one of the sources that I used. They did some really good research.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And yet, when I look up the Knights Templar in any of the resource material, for example, that I have at the seminary, they literally just describe them in one sentence as like the highway patrol for people who were going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. That's it. Right. That's all they said.
Well, they just give you the cover story.
Yeah, I mean, and yet it's obvious as without even going much deeper. I mean, you don't have to take a lot of things on faith to see that the Knights Templar had an enormous impact on architecture and on power, and the source of that is never discussed. And so I'm sort of intrigued by the idea that they could have contained in those writings enough of the ancient mysteries that at least gave them, if not the actual power itself, the illusion of power that made other leaders cower at the very mention of their name.
That's exactly true. And in fact, there is some speculation, and this is, of course, controversial, that they may actually have discovered the original Ark of the Covenant and brought it back to Europe. I don't really know about that, but their advances were phenomenal. They actually were the originators of something that was quite similar to our modern credit card. They had their own banks, and they